Good evening, everyone. I had some difficulties with live streaming yesterday, and I decided it would be better to just record it today. See how that goes. I'll be uploading it at 4/6 rather, as usual. And I thank you all very much for coming, and I expect you same feedback in the comments as you would in the chat. I love the chat. I love interacting. I'm going to figure out what's going on with my live stream before I do it again. I am wearing my Carrie Lake t-shirt here in this blue city, and no one has said a single thing about it to me so far. We'll see what happens this evening. I think we're gonna go out and go maybe to Best Buy. When I was at my previous home, I had a couple people recognize her name in Walmart and point it out. I had a lady at Old Navy say, "Wow, Carrie Lake, that's kind of cool." That was very cool. I feel like this is a really good way to figure out if you're among friends, not. I'm kind of on edge about that. Thus far, I was noticing that there are houses in the neighborhood with thin blue line flags, and with signs that say "Thank you to our law enforcement officers" or whatever. And I'm just like, oh, okay, so that is where, people who I might agree with more probably live. So I feel like there are always indicators for people you might ideologically align with if you're looking for them. Strategies, I think, going forward. So I actually thought that today would be an interesting topic for today would be sex, because a lady tweeted about it and caused quite a kerfuffle. So her name is Alexandra Hunt, and we're going to go through her thread, and we're going to go through her more nuanced explanation of what she meant. I think she has some interesting ideas, but I think she's really missing out on some of the fundamentals. So let's jump right into it. Yeah, so her name is Alexandra M. Hunt. She does have pronouns in her bio, so do with that what you will. I am going to read it and give her the benefit of the doubt. And I thought this was interesting because since I saw this yesterday, Twitter has added context they thought people might want to know to this tweet, which is interesting. This says the legend on this chart says it shows a share of people who have reported not having those who are virgins. This tweet's claim is not made in the original article. Okay, so let's see what she says in her tweet. Let's see if that's accurate. First of all, she opens the tweet by saying, "Young men aren't having sex!" ! Nearly a third of men under 30 and a higher percent do not have as much sex as they'd like. Not exactly statistic is a sign of much deeper problems. It is, but not in the way she thinks, I would dare say. Our society sweeps it under the rug. The consequences are straightforward. There is more violence. Since platforms like Craigslist were banned from advertising sex, serious violent crimes against all women, not just sex workers, has increased by nearly 1/5. Okay, I don't know if that's the case at all. I would have to say spurious causation on this one. Correlation does not equal causation, and I don't think it's Craigslist's fault if violence against women is in fact up. We are all familiar with the 1 in 5 women gets assaulted when they go to college theory. I'm calling it a theory because it's common knowledge, supposedly. It's 100% not true at all. I was talking to Annie about that the other day. I was like, can you imagine if that were actually the case? Do you really think that anyone would send their daughters to college? I don't think so either. But I digress. She continues. And men who do not have sex suffer. They're less likely to be a part of the labor force and more likely to experience depression, nihilism, and other mental health issues. Okay, sure, maybe. The hashtag #MeToo movement accomplished so much, and we have to take the next step. Normalizing having healthy, positive, consensual sex. Decriminalizing sex work, funding sex education, and creating outreach programs that help young people develop healthy sexual habits. Okay, I personally do not criminalize sex work. Although I suppose if it is consensual, you could make the argument. That would be an argument for libertarians to have, not for me. I personally think it's bad. I find it to be morally reprehensible. But we're going to get into the implications of all this later on, so let's continue. We should be moving toward a right to sex. Okay, this is the tweet I took issue with. We should be moving toward a right to sex. People should be able to have sex when they feel they want to, and we need to develop services that meet people's needs without attaching the baggage of shame or criminalization. We need to bring these discussions to the spotlight. Normalizing healthy, positive sex will have too many downstream benefits to list. We need to move past our history of shame. It's time to bring sex into the light. Okay, so there's quite a bit to unpack here, but just within those last couple tweets, I will say that Having a right to sex is what is known as a positive right. I don't know if you guys are familiar with positive and negative rights, but the only actual right that anybody should ever expect to have is a negative right. You have a right to not be forced to do something. I believe that's my understanding. If you guys want to correct me on the negative right, positive right thing, my most understanding is that a right to something, like a right to healthcare, is a positive right and not something that can necessarily be enforced. This is not what the founders had in mind when they were talking about rights. We need to bring these discussions to the spotlight. Do we, though? Have we ever had a culture that's been more embracing of sex? She's talking about normalizing healthy, positive sex. Fine, sure, maybe, but never once in the course of this thread has she mentioned something like marriage. And Lord actually pointed this out in the first response tweet. Excellent that men are waiting till marriage, epic win. I don't know if they're necessarily waiting till marriage. If that is the case, I could see that as a positive thing, honestly. But she doesn't talk about it at all. She doesn't talk about family structure. She doesn't talk about men's need to be respected and admired and have great responsibility placed upon them. She just thinks that sex is the be-all end-all, and I have to disagree with her on that. I think she's entirely wrong. I think this is the pronouns coming out in the course of this tweet thread. She does explain what she said, though, and she actually wrote a kind of a long little diatribe here. So let's go through this, too, and see if we agree with her on this. She says, see my statement on the topic of young men having less sex here. First, I want to believe sex can exist without consent, period. Okay, of course. I do believe sex workers have an obligation. I do not believe that sex workers have an obligation to help or support anyone but themselves. As a sex worker and someone who has experienced sexual violence, I'm acutely aware of the ever-present risks, of the ever-present risks of sexual violence facing anyone who is not a cis-het man who dares to have sex in our society, blah, 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 blah. I'd like to discuss a very important, albeit nuanced issue, rates of sex among men. That's really interesting that she wants to have a nuanced conversation on Twitter. More power to her, I suppose, although I suspect at the end of this we'll probably end up mostly disagreeing with her. Now, before you groan and call me names, hear me out. Environment where everyone feels confident, comfortable, and competent having safe sex with affirmative consent. No, this doesn't mean we should force women to, quote, service violent men. I'm envisioning a world where young men are good in bed. Okay, so affirmative consent is where you are actively, constantly affirming your approval of the process ongoing, which has always struck me as an insane standard to try to uphold. Like, seriously, good luck to you if you'd like to make this happen. But I do appreciate that she thinks it's important that young men have some kind of advantage, because young men have been advantaged. We talked about this a long time ago on Timcast IRL. We talked about how men and women operate on different slopes. Men start life at huge disadvantage, gradually add value as they grow older. So they're operating like this. Whereas women start life at a great advantage, if you can see my hand, and then over time it declines. Now, this isn't what people want to hear. This is not what women want to hear. This is what feminists want us to believe. But it is the case. There is a reason that we send our young men to war. It's because young men, unfortunately, are considered to hold less worth than young women. This shouldn't be the case. I have an issue with it, but honestly, a man is able, however many females are around, but a woman has, first of all, the investment of 9 months of pregnancy, and then the concomitant however many years of raising the child and caring for that child, which is why we have the institutions of marriage, which is why I strongly recommend getting married young if that's something that you're capable of doing. But again, I digress. Let us continue. You see, young men just aren't having as much sex as they used to. A Washington Post article showed a surprising decline in sexual activity among men aged 18 to 30 years old. Why does this matter? Well, research shows that when men, and particularly young men, aren't having sex, they have more anxiety and depression, fewer meaningful romantic relationships and friendships, lessened participation in the workforce, a declining rate of college attendance, and lower rates of home ownership. That's very interesting. I know what you're thinking. Alexandra, you're a feminist. Why do you care about young men having less sex? Okay, here we go. I care because I know it's a sign of a much deeper issue hurting everyone in our country. And that issue is class warfare. Oh, interesting. I like to see how she ties this together. We are seeing the most extreme wealth gaps between generations in our country's history, and the impact is so severe that even young men who have previously thrived in a country built for their success are feeling the pressure. Stress is a pretty major cockblock, as most women know. Okay, so I have a lot of issues with what she just said. I'm glad that she cares about young men, whatever capacity that might be in. And since apparently her only capacity to think about is sex, fine, that's the way she's looking at this. It's a sign of a deeper issue hurting everyone in our country. The issue is class warfare. I agree that we have a serious case of class warfare. I don't think it's right. We're seeing the most extreme wealth gaps between generations in our country's history. Impact is so severe, even young men. Okay, so we are seeing severe disparities in wealth and extreme inequality. That is true. But she goes on to say that young men who have previously thrived in a country built for their success, and I have to disagree. I don't think that the U.S. was built for any one group's success. I think it was designed to be a place where anyone could come and succeed. That's just the bottom line. That's part of the reason that I am patriotic. They're feeling the pressure. Okay, sure, fine, whatever. So far, this has been pretty nuanced. I agree with her on some things. I disagree with her on other things. The recipe for a country where all of us can have healthy, consensual, satisfying sex includes economic opportunity and affordable housing. Okay, this is starting to sound a little communist-y. It also includes expanding and protecting access to the full spectrum, oh, here we go, of reproductive health care for anyone who wants it, as well as funding medically accurate, comprehensive, age-appropriate sex ed. Okay, sex and masturbation are considered taboo and criminal topics, making them issues that politicians don't want to touch. But we need to talk about sex to address the issues that make healthy, consensual, satisfying sex a possibility for all. Okay, so she's basically saying that in order for everyone to be happy in the bedroom, we need to have generalized, access to, housing? I don't understand that at all. And I really don't want to hear the Planned Parenthood shtick. I hear it constantly. It's too much. But she goes back to Me Too. Here we go. The Me Too movement brought a lot of awareness and education around the topics of consent. The evangelical movement, interesting that she would call it that, brought a lot around the topic of sex. Oh, okay. So she's saying the evangelical Christian movement. She should have clarified that because it sounds like she's calling the Me Too movement an evangelical movement, which is something that I would entirely agree with. The evangelical Christian, I'm adding, movement brought a lot of shame and stigma around the topic of sex. Sex is a good thing when done in a healthy, consensual, satisfying manner. A lot of men are unsure of how to have this good sex because they've never been properly educated. The practice of affirmative consent can seem daunting, and the shame and stigma surrounding stigmatization and resources that could allow men to become better partners. We've done a good job telling men that they shouldn't do, but who's telling men what they should do? Okay, a lot to unpack there. Holy moly. She is correct that sex is a good thing when done in a healthy, consensual, satisfying manner, so we will agree on that. What we will not ever agree on is the fact that shame and stigma are around sex and cut off conversation, because literally we're having this now. And I will say first and foremost that the reason there is shame around sex out of wedlock is because impetus for people to get married and to have sex within those confines. That's the way it was supposed to be. That's why that shame exists. I could go off on a whole tangent about shame and guilt. Because I think that shame and guilt are, first of all, I think they're completely mislabeled anymore. And I think that we are giving them a negative reputation that they do not deserve. Shame and guilt exist for a reason. Shame is there to tell you what's culturally appropriate to do. Guilt is there to tell you when you've made a mistake and to remind you that you shouldn't do it again. Now, I feel like a lot of the issues we see culturally are based on unacknowledged guilt and a resistance to shame that shouldn't be there. I don't think you should resist shame. I think that if shame comes to you, you need to examine exactly what you've done and why you're feeling it. Is it possible that people currently feel shame around sex because we know way down at the back of our minds that we should be doing it with one person in one situation ever? I think she's coming at this from the wrong angle, but I respect that she's trying to do it. To me, this says that she's a thoughtful person who has been misguided, like a lot of young women. I'm not sure how old Alexandra is, but it sounds like she's been just steeped in this critical theory and she's become very almost Marxist in her ideas, super feminist for sure. And hope to see her develop her thought process over the course of the next few years. I definitely follow her with interest. I might start following her on Twitter for sure. She wraps with men. I would love for responsibility of educating young men on how to be respectful, communicative, satisfying sexual partners to be our government rather than on me. Okay, so I would say that I cannot agree with her on that because I don't think the government has any. Well, you want to get the. Didn't they just get done telling us that they want the government out of people's uteruses? Didn't they just get done saying that they don't want the government in the bedroom? If that's truly what you think, then you need to not put this on the government. What should be happening in an ideal world is parents who are married would take the responsibility of teaching their children, first of all, what is best in. The only rational place for sex to be had is within the married confines. And I know that some people view that as restrictive, conservative, whatever, 1950s. I really don't care. The fact of the matter is that this is the most fulfilling situation for sex to be used in, because you can look at the people who are using these dating apps. Do they strike you as happy? Because they do not strike me as happy. Strike me as lucky stars that I've never had to use a dating app, and God willing, never will have to in the future. It's a serious dearth of meaning that pushes you into a dating app, and it makes me so sad. It makes me wonder what happened to our culture and to our sense of community, that we can no longer go outside and just meet somebody with whom we somewhat agree and just be like, hey, would you like to go out with me? I like X, Y, and Z. Do you like any of those things? And if they say, oh, well, I like Y, then you can have a conversation. You got to find something. Strike up the conversation, find out what makes them interesting, tell them what makes you interesting. I'm admittedly not an expert on relationships because I've been very lucky to have had long-term relationships in my past. I haven't had to use dating apps, thank goodness. And I have a great deal of sympathy for people who do. But I think she's going in the wrong direction with this. And I'm glad that I was actually able to talk about this with you guys this afternoon, because I think that we need more people like her who have thought about this stuff. Even if you reach the wrong conclusion, the fact that you're thinking about it is such a good sign, and such a sign that you're willing to maybe engage in these conversations. The fact that she went back and wrote like this whole little essay about it is actually really helpful too, because this is something aspirational that she hopes for young men. And I appreciate, first of all, that she's thinking about someone other than herself. And second of all, that she's actually coming up with, to be fair, her solutions are kind of terrible, but she's at least trying. I have to say, I respect it. My verdict on this one is that I don't agree with her on everything. She's got her good points, some of them, but I am grateful that she's trying. And I think that we need to really embrace the people who are trying to come up with novel ways of challenging problems that they see in the status quo. That is the way forward. Because that way, when you listen to someone give their side of the story, you can say, okay, well, I'm glad that you're saying this because I disagree with you on X, Y, and Z. So let's sit down and have a conversation about it. Honestly, I wouldn't mind talking to her about this. Maybe we could change her mind about all about family. She doesn't have family, which makes me really sad. I really just think that's the feminism speaking. And then the whole, give it to the government instead of, the individual's parents or the family structure. When you don't include, so Annie and I talk about this a lot because I think that conservatives view the individual as the smallest unit of society, and I'm kind of in a weird position because I don't. I view the family as the smallest unit of society because a good family structure is what gives individual. And I think that that's something that cannot be overstated. The importance cannot be said enough. And I think if we are to really fix what's gone wrong, we need to start at the family level. We need to incentivize parenthood. We need to talk about the value of having children. We need to figure out ways to teach people to be good parents and explain to them the importance of that action. Like, people seem to view, I hear people talk about parenthood as if it's some kind of terrible duty that they have to fulfill because now they've had kids, their lives are over or whatever. I think that's entirely backwards. You have such a huge role. You have a responsibility. You have so many different things, so many different ways that you can influence these young people. And Jordan Peterson talks about how you have a pristine relationship with your children when they're born. And that's entirely correct. You have a pristine relationship with no one else in your life. Everyone else has already already comes with their own set of baggage, and they have their own issues to deal with, and you already probably have a history with them, stuff like that. When your child is born, first of all, you're the only person that they know, so you get to welcome them to the world. You get to kind of show them around and point them in the right direction. You literally get to teach them their first words. You get to be there when they take their first steps. To me, this is just such a positive thing, and it makes me really sad that this lady, as thoughtful as she has been, apparently never even considers the important factor that having children and having the responsibility of a family, the role that that might play in a young man's depression, nihilism, and sadness. It's not just about sex. It never is. It never is. Sex is just a small part of a big picture about what makes life meaningful. And honestly, a meaningful life will include good, reliable, trusting sex with one person that you care about. It's not that complicated. And I think this little essay that she wrote is just an example of how having a kind of circuitous mindset and a circuitous worldview will give you a very and weird reasoning. And much as you might want to try to fix the world with it, it's going to make it harder. Put away all of that extra stuff and you're just like, okay, we need families. There's a reason that families exist. Families are essential for creating good men. Good men are essential for creating, future good families. It's such a cycle, and it's not something that you can exclude from this talk about sex. So to wrap this all up, I have to say, as I said multiple times before, I'm repeating myself at this point, but I do appreciate that she took the time to write this out. I appreciate that she started this conversation. I think it's cool. I wish that more ladies would, and now I wish that she would continue to think through her feminism and see it for the weak, poor alternative for actual family life that it is. And if you are a praying kind of person, you could definitely pray that she comes around and realizes the vapid nature of her own beliefs. She seems to be struggling with it, so it makes me a little optimistic. Hopefully she can kind of draw the right conclusions over the course of time. Good on her for sticking up for young men. I appreciate that. That's very much a rarity among feminists. Good for her. Until tomorrow, guys, let me know what you think of this topic. Let me know what you think of my take. Go and see what else Alexandra has said on Twitter. I don't think she's exactly an exemplary lady. I know she has a history, but I do think that she might be on the right track, and hopefully she can shake herself loose from feminism and bring some other ladies with her. Until then, bye, guys.